we're going to move very quickly to the next speaker who made the trek up here from Houston, Texas, our sister city, I guess. And this is Professor Hans Stockton from the University of St. Thomas. So, Hans, you're on.
Thank you, sir. Very good. I'm usually pretty loud. Can y'all hear me okay? Yes. All right. Well, very good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Ho, thank you very, where are you? There you go. Thank you very, very much for the invitation to join you today. My vision, and I know it's Carl's vision, and Professor Ye's vision, and Dr. Wong's vision, is to make Texas the center of Taiwan studies in this country. There is a powerful network. There is a powerful network of university relationships from Houston to Dallas to Austin to Huntsville that I think would really surprise you all. And a big reason for the success we have is community support. From good folks like you, a rock and roll star director general in Houston who supports our efforts. And so y'all have as much to do with the success of these efforts as any of the academics that are going to speak to you today, if I may be so bold. But Dr. Ho, thank you very much. I've been in Taiwan for every presidential election since 1996. And I've been there for every legislative election since 1992. And I'll tell you one thing that I think I can say is a fact. Now, we don't often talk about that very much. The fact is that when people lose an election, they tend to be very surprised. How in the world could we lose this election? But the people that win the election never act surprised. So I think it's natural for people who lose elections to be very surprised and do a lot of soul searching. There are two exceptions to that. One was back in 2008 when the Democratic Progressive Party was soundly defeated in the presidential election. And the party going into that election knew they weren't going to do very well, and they already knew why. And I think there's a lot to be said for the 2020 election as the KMT rolled into this national election. Their confidence as a party organization was not very high, and they already knew what the main issues were. So the outcome of the election, I don't think, was a great surprise to a lot of people within the party organization. But I'm not here to talk about the election. I'm here to talk about U.S.-Taiwan relations, because that way I get to stay out of trouble. So, and I got 8 more minutes left. So the current phase of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship really begins with the overlap of the Trump administration and the Tsai administration. The relationship since then has been largely on steroids compared to prior administrations. And I think that everybody that has an interest in promoting U.S.-Taiwan relations can agree that the intensity, the scale, the scope of the relationship has really taken light years improvement. Now, this has also been combined with an American Congress that has become much more hawkish towards China than it has traditionally, and its willingness to embrace Taiwan in very tangible ways. So it's not just Trump. Trump's credit is in large part due to a Congress that is cooperating in a legislative sense with the things that he also wants to see accomplished in this slice. American concern about a rising China, combined with, I think, a very important thing, and that is Tsai Ing-wen's somewhat moderated rhetoric about Taiwan, Taiwan's sovereignty, Taiwan's position in the world, has produced 3 years of very forward progress in the relationship. Commercial relations. 2019 was a record year for U.S.-Taiwan trade. Taiwan is on track to have generated somewhere in the area of a $50 billion trade surplus, which might actually end up not being so good if Trump pays attention to that. Secondly, diplomatic relations, or at least the visibility of direct communications has improved tremendously. 2019, the heads of the National Security Councils met for the first time since 1979. That was visible. That was a very public kind of a session. Congressional action in the United States, including the Taiwan Travel Act, the Taipei Act, and 2 back-to-back years of National Defense Authorization Acts being approved, amended by the Congress to put in increasingly more Taiwan-friendly language into these very, very important acts that appropriate budgets to the military. International space, we see very public American communications to our allies in the Pacific, for example, to try to create some sort of consortial consensus about staving off any further Chinese encroachments of diplomatic allies of the ROC. And of course, strategic relationships, 12 billion, give or take, dollars worth of arms sales in the last 3 years. But that's not the most important part. The most important part is the fact the United States is in the process of selling F-16 fighters that Taiwan has been after for quite a while. And so it's not just the dollar amount, it's the sophistication of the military hardware being transferred. So when we think of intensifying the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, or the U.S. kind of pivot towards Taiwan, conditioned on a U.S. pivot somewhat away from China, I see this as a function in large part of a Tsai administration that does not accelerate or aggravate the rhetoric that it has been so successful with vis-a-vis American relations, not Taiwan domestic politics. But also, many of you might cringe when I say it, 4 more years of the Trump administration. With the Democratic president after November, I think all bets are kind of up to question, right? So some of the hallmarks to look for in the next, if there is a second Trump administration, some of the things to look for: commercial relations, free trade agreement between the U.S. and Taiwan in the next year to 18 months. The coronavirus has awakened not just the U.S. but the world to just how dependent we have all become on the Chinese supply chain as well as consumer markets. And you're already seeing Apple and other major producers trying to redirect their manufacturing facilities. And I think this is going to have some lasting impact moving forward on commercial relations that will benefit Taiwan. As well, all politics is local, and all politics cares about one primary thing, and that's jobs. So as Foxconn invests incredible amounts of money up in the Midwest, as Formosa Plastics has a multi-billion-dollar new naphtha cracker plant, investment in Louisiana. It already has multi-billion-dollar investment in Point Comfort, Texas. You're going to see more of it. Taiwan Semiconductor is under an intense amount of pressure to build new manufacturing facilities here in the U.S. to manufacture military-grade software chips for our hardware as well. Diplomatic. Post-election, William Lai makes a very public visit to Washington, D.C. as a private citizen, okay? But the big difference is he came to D.C. as the vice president-elect. He wasn't the vice president candidate. And this is a major change. We're going to start to see, I think, elects, so-and-so elects actually having direct communication with counterparts in Taiwan, no longer just candidates for an election to come. Congress, I'm getting a vibe that there's going to be more and more pressure over the next 2 to 3 years for Congress to revisit the Taiwan Relations Act. I know there are some on Capitol Hill that are calling for changes to the TRA that actually make our support of Taiwan much more explicit. And actually, as excited as I am about Taiwan relations, I think that might open a can of worms and some unintended consequences. Of course, strategic relations, we see an increase in freedom of navigation, traffic by the United States in not only the South and East China Seas, but in the very near proximity of Taiwan. We also have seen some more common flights, or not flyovers, but air traffic of U.S. Air Force, B-52, those guys, very near the Taiwan area. Now that's posturing, that's American posturing against China, not just over Taiwan, but China's expansion into the area. Point being, we see more and more public and larger scale and much more sensational American efforts to remind our friends in China to maintain what is currently our desires expressed in the TRA. Is that time ready for me, or is it already passed? I got 1 minute. I yield the remainder of my time, Mr. Chair. But anyway, so there in a nutshell, I better stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.